My name is Jonah. I am 34 years old. For 11 years, I was not just an ordinary witch. I was assigned to monitor, to attack, and to spiritually manipulate destinies through dreams, especially through snakes. I'm speaking to you plainly, the way I understand things now, because what I'm about to tell you is not something I learned from a book. It's something I did, something I took part in, something I carry with me every day because I regret it. You see, many of you listening to me right now think those snake dreams are nothing. You wake up, you shake it off. Sometimes you even laugh about it. I used to count on that reaction because what you don't realize is this: those dreams are not random, they are carefully organized operations. And I was part of the group that carried them out. I grew up in Enugu State, Nigeria. My father died when I was 9. My mother struggled, and we had very little. By the time I entered university in Ansoka, I was desperate for help, for anything that could change my situation. That was when I met Unasu. She didn't look unusual. She was beautiful, spoke well, and always seemed to have money. At first, she helped me. She paid my school fees, bought me clothes, and took me to places I couldn't have imagined going. Then one night, she said something to me that stayed with me. She said, Jama, there is a way. You can stop suffering, but you must be bold. I asked her what she meant. She smiled in a calm way and asked me, can you handle spiritual power? That was how it started for me. She took me out one night to a place I had never been. It was deep in a bush, quiet and hidden. There were about 9 of us there, all girls, different ages. And that night, I saw something I've never been able to forget. There was a large clay pot in the center, and inside it were snakes, real snakes, moving, alive, hissing. I wanted to leave. Every part of me said to run, but it was already too late. They told us clearly, if you leave now, your life ends tonight. So I stayed. Looking back, that was the biggest mistake I ever made. One by one, they called us forward. When it was my turn, they told me to kneel. One of the older women placed a snake on my neck. I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. And then she said, from today, you will operate in the realm of dreams. That was my initiation. After that, the training didn't happen the way you might expect. It wasn't physical, it was spiritual. Every night, my spirit would leave my body and we would gather. That was where I began to understand how things really work. Snakes, the way you see them in dreams, are not just animals, they are instruments. Let me explain it the way I came to understand it. The first assignment I was given was to monitor someone. It was a young lady in Abuja. She was a prayerful Christian, and to us, that made her dangerous. We were told not to attack her directly, not at first. We were told to observe her. That night, I was sent into her dream, not as myself, but as a snake. I entered her room spiritually and stayed under her bed, just watching. I observed her, tracked her habits, her prayer life, her weak points. Every time she saw a snake in her dream, it wasn't her imagination, it was me doing my assignment. Another assignment I was given involved a man in Lagos. He was about to experience financial growth. We were instructed to stop that from happening. So we used what we call the dream covenant. I was sent into his dream as a snake. In the dream, I bit him physically. Nothing happened. He woke up and ignored it. But from my side, that bite meant something. It was an agreement. From that point on, things in his life began to slow down. His business struggled. Opportunities didn't come through. What he didn't know was that something had been established spiritually. They were also assignments that involved a different kind of approach. We were trained to use snakes in dreams to create certain experiences. Sometimes the snake would chase a person, wrap around them, or even enter their body in the dream. These weren't just dreams, they were meant to affect the person in ways they didn't fully understand. Afterward, people would notice changes, less interest in prayer, unusual thoughts, delays in important areas of life. I remember one assignment involving a pastor. He was genuine and we couldn't reach him directly. So instead, we worked around him. I was sent into his dream as a large snake. Each time he tried to move forward, I would block his way. He would wake up tired and unsettled. Over time, the goal was simple: make him feel stuck. I did these assignments for years. Over time, I became known, respected, even feared in that environment. But something began to change inside me. I couldn't rest properly anymore. Whenever I closed my eyes, I would see fire. Not ordinary fire, but something that felt like judgment. Then, one night, everything shifted. I was sent to carry out an assignment on a small boy, maybe 7 years old. I was told he was dangerous and needed to be stopped early. I entered his dream as a snake, just as I had done many times before. But the moment I got close to him, he shouted one word: Jesus. Immediately, something happened I had never experienced before. I felt fire, real pain. I screamed and pulled back. I returned to where I came from, but I was shaken. That was the moment I realized something wasn't the way I had believed. Let me tell you something, honestly, something many in that system would never say. We are not as powerful as people think. Much of what we do depends on people not paying attention, not praying, not understanding what is happening to them. After that experience, I became afraid. I couldn't continue the same way. One day, without planning it, I walked into a small church in Enugu. The pastor was speaking about dream attacks. As he spoke, I recognized everything. It was like hearing my own actions described back to me. I couldn't hold it in. I started crying. And when he called people forward, I didn't hesitate. I ran. That day I confessed everything I had done, and they prayed for me. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without my spirit leaving my body. Now, if you've been seeing snakes in your dreams, I want you to listen carefully. Don't dismiss it casually. Take it seriously. Pray about it. Reject anything that feels like an agreement because what looks like a simple dream can sometimes be more than that. After my first encounter with that boy who called the name of Jesus, I should have stopped, but I didn't. By that time, I was already deeply involved, and it wasn't something you could walk away from easily. You need to understand this clearly. Once you are initiated into that system, living is not simple. It's not like resigning from a job. It's not like resigning from a job. It's more like trying to escape from a place where your own soul is tied into the structure. There was something we used to call spiritual implantation. I want to explain it carefully because many people experience it without realizing what is happening. This is how snakes are planted in dreams. Most of these operations happen between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. That time matters because the body is deeply asleep. The spirit becomes more accessible and resistance is lower. That is when operations are carried out. We didn't just appear randomly, there was always a target, a purpose, and what we called permission. That permission could come from different things: fear, certain actions, past agreements, or even family connections. Once that access was established, we would enter through dreams. Not all dreams are the same. Some are what we called gate dreams. In those, the spirit is more engaged, and that's where actual transactions happen. I remember one assignment very clearly. It involved a young woman in Port Harcourt. She was beautiful and had a strong future ahead of her, but she had no spiritual discipline and no real protection. That made her vulnerable. The first night, I entered her dream as a snake, but I didn't attack. I simply appeared. That was the first step, introduction. She saw me, became afraid, and woke up. The second night I returned. This time I chased her. She ran, she panicked, and then she woke up again. That was the second step, familiarization through fear. By the third night, things changed. She didn't run the same way. She was tired, confused, and less resistant. That was when the real operation happened. I wrapped around her in the dream, slowly, carefully, and then entered. When she woke up, she felt different, heavy, weak, not quite herself. From that point, her life began to change. Now, let me explain what typically happens after that kind of experience. This is where many people get confused. First, there can be delays. Things that should move forward begin to slow down or stop. Second, there is often a kind of spiritual weakness. Prayer becomes difficult. Things that once made sense no longer feel clear. Third, the dreams repeat. Once that door is open, it doesn't usually stop on its own. Fourth, there can be physical sensations, movement, pressure, heat. Not everything is physical in origin. There is also something deeper that people don't talk about enough. Sometimes, after seeing a snake in a dream, a person may also eat something in that same dream or be given food. That is not random. It is what we called sealing. After the initial operation, Food is used to strengthen what was established. It reinforces the connection and makes it harder to break. I was part of this process. After an operation, another agent would appear in the dream and offer food. If the person accepted it, the connection became stronger. There were also assignments that involved something more serious. I remember one that still troubles me. It involved a man in Lagos who had wealth but no spiritual awareness. We were instructed to carry out a transfer. That night, two operations took place. One person was attacked using a snake, another received a different kind of interaction. The snake acted as a point of connection. When it bit or wrapped around someone, it established a link. Through that link, something could be moved from one person to another. After that operation, the wealthy man's situation improved quickly, but the other person began to lose everything. This is why sometimes people rise suddenly or fall without clear explanation. There can be things happening beneath the surface. Hey, now, about timing. Most of these dream operations involving snakes happen between 12:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m., especially around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 3 o'clock. That's when activity is highest. Many people are asleep and fewer are actively praying. We were trained to avoid people who were active during those hours in prayer. Those individuals were considered difficult to approach. If someone sees a snake once in a dream, it may be a warning. But when it happens repeatedly, that usually points to something ongoing. It can mean that a connection has already been established, or that something has not been completed, or that there is continued monitoring. In some situations, it can even mean that a person is being gradually drawn into something without realizing it. One of the most difficult assignments I remember involved a young woman who was part of a choir. She was sincere and committed. We were not sent to harm her physically, but to weaken her spiritually. I appeared to her multiple times in her dreams as a snake. She prayed, but she didn't understand what was happening. Eventually, the operation succeeded. After one particular dream, things changed. She lost interest in what she once cared about. She stopped praying. She stopped participating. Her direction shifted completely. The difficult part is that she never understood why. After years of doing these things, something began to affect me in a way I hadn't expected. I started to feel guilt. Faces of people I had been assigned to began appearing in my dreams. But this time, I wasn't in control. I was the one being pursued. I would see snakes everywhere, closing in, and I would hear a voice saying, "What you gave is coming back to you." It became too much for me to ignore. So I want to say this to you directly. If you keep seeing snakes in your dreams, don't brush it aside. Address it. When you wake up, be intentional. Reject anything that feels like an agreement. Spend time in prayer, even if it's brief. Be consistent. Also, be mindful before you sleep. Be consistent. Also, be mindful before you sleep. Not every dream is just a dream. Some are places where things are taking place that affect real life. I know this because I was part of it. By this time in my life, I was no longer at ease. On the outside, I looked normal, but internally, things were changing. The deeper I had gone into that system, the more I began to understand something that I hadn't seen clearly before. Most attacks don't begin with the individual directly. They often begin with where the person comes from. Most attacks don't begin with you directly. They often begin with where you come from. I learned that very clearly over time. There was something we depended on a great deal, and we called it bloodline access. Before going after anyone, we would first check for a connection in their lineage. If there were past covenants, idol worship, sacrifices, or any form of occult involvement tied to the family, then access became easier. Then access became easier. In that situation, there was already an open door, and we didn't have to force entry. I remember one assignment in Benin City. There was a man, successful, educated, respected, but we didn't approach him first. Instead, we went to his village. There was an old shrine there. Physically, it looked abandoned, but spiritually, it was still active. That shrine had a symbol, a serpent, and for us, that was enough. When a serpent is connected to a family altar, it becomes a kind of signature. From that point, access is established. Through that connection, we reached him. That was when his dreams started. He began seeing snakes repeatedly. He thought it was stress or something ordinary. But it wasn't. It was access through his background. There's also something that affects children, and it's something many people don't take seriously. Children are often easier to approach. They are more open, and they don't know how to resist or even interpret what they see. We were often assigned to children, especially those with strong potential. I remember a boy around 5 years old. We were told to mark him early. That night, I appeared in his dream as a small snake, not threatening, just present. He didn't react with fear. Edge, he simply watched, and that was the objective, to make it seem harmless. Because once a child becomes familiar with it, it becomes easier to build on that connection over time. Doubt, connection over time. Sometimes children will say, I saw a snake, but it didn't do anything. That may sound harmless, but it can mean something has already started. There were also assignments that involved forming deeper connections. This is something many people may find difficult to accept, but I will explain it as I experienced it. Not every snake dream is an attack. Some are a form of proposal. In that system, there are operations designed to create unions, not physical ones, but spiritual ones. And snakes were often used as the symbol of that connection. I was once involved in such an assignment. It concerned a woman in Abuja. She was intelligent and capable, but she experienced repeated delays in her relationships. We were sent to establish a hold. In her dream, I appeared as a snake, but I didn't attack her. Instead, I wrapped around her gently. There was no fear in the dream, only stillness. That was not an attack, it was a claim. After that, Her relationships continued to fade. From the outside, it seemed like coincidence. But from what I knew, something had already been established. Not everyone is approached with force. Some people are drawn gradually. It happens in stages. First, there is appearance, then interaction, then contact, eventually acceptance. And once acceptance happens, a connection is formed. That is why repeated snake dreams should not be ignored. Patterns matter. By this time, I was struggling internally. The guilt, the fear, and the dreams I was having made it difficult to continue. I wanted to leave, but leaving was not simple. One night, I refused to attend one of our gatherings. That decision had consequences. That same night, I was taken, not physically, but spiritually, to a place I had never seen before. It was dark, quiet, and very still. Then I saw beings that were not human. One of them spoke and said, "You want to leave, then you must pay." They gave me a condition. I had to bring someone to take my place, or I would face the punishment myself. I understood what that meant. It meant replacing myself. That was how the system worked. That was how it held people in place. But I refused. After that, things changed for me. The attack started. For days, I couldn't rest. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw snakes everywhere. But this time, they were not under my control. They were against me. They would chase, bite, wrap around me. I would wake up in fear, weak and unsettled. I knew then that this was not just pressure, it was retaliation. One night, in the middle of all of that, I remembered something I had not used in a long time: the name Jesus. At first, I said it quietly, then I repeated it again and again. Suddenly, everything stopped. The snakes disappeared. The atmosphere changed. For the first time in a long while, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known. Let me say this carefully. Not every situation resolves immediately. Not every situation resolves immediately. Some things require more than a single moment. There are situations that take time, prayer, discipline, sometimes guidance, because some connections run deep. But one thing I came to understand is that light has an effect. It changes things. If a child keeps seeing snakes, or if you find yourself experiencing repeated dreams like that, don't ignore it. Pay attention. Take action. Pray about it. Seek help if needed, because things that are left unattended tend to grow. If you've stayed with me to this point, then you already understand something many people overlook. These experiences are real to the people going through them. But what I want to share next is not about fear. It's about how I found a way out of what held me for years. Because what kept me there for so long is the same thing I eventually had to confront and break away from. After that night when I called the name of Jesus, something changed, but I was not completely free. That's important to understand. An encounter can begin a process, but it doesn't always finish it immediately. I still had dreams. I still felt pressure. But now I had some clarity I didn't have before. The pastor I met in Negu told me something that stayed with me. He said, Jama, what you were involved in was not just activity, it was covenant. And covenant must be broken intentionally. That word, covenant, stood out to me. The first step I was guided to take was to renounce everything, not quietly, not casually, but directly and deliberately. That night, I knelt down and spoke clearly. I said, every agreement I entered, knowingly or unknowingly, I break it now in the name of Jesus. At first, nothing seemed to happen, but later that night, I had a dream. I found myself standing in a field. It was dark and empty. Then I saw it, a very large snake, larger than anything I had seen before. And I understood something immediately. This was not just another snake. This represented the root, everything I had been part of, every connection, every assignment seemed tied to it. It began to move toward me slowly, with a kind of confidence. And if I am honest, part of me still felt fear, but I remembered what I had been told to do. I said, I am no longer yours. The snake stopped. Then I said, every covenant is broken. It reacted, becoming restless. Then, with everything I had, I called the name Jesus. What happened next is something I remember very clearly. There was a force, like fire, but not physical. It was strong, focused, and direct. It came from above and struck the snake. The snake reacted, and then it began to burn. As that hat fell, I felt I felt something change within me. It was like weight being lifted, like layers coming off one after another. By the time it ended, the snake was gone. And for the first time, I felt a sense of release that I hadn't experienced before. Let me explain what I came to understand from that experience as simply as I can. First, renunciation has to be intentional. It's not something you assume or think quietly, it has to be spoken clearly. Second, consistency matters. Regular prayer, especially at night, even if it's brief, has an effect over time. Third, there is power in calling on the name of Jesus. I didn't understand it before, but I experienced it directly. Fourth, it helps not to isolate yourself. Being connected to a place or people who understand these things provides support. Fifth, understanding matters. When there is clarity, confusion loses its hold. There are also signs that indicate change has taken place. For example, the dreams may stop or they may shift, where instead of being overpowered, you begin to overcome. There can be a sense of lightness. Things that once felt difficult begin to ease. Movement returns to areas that were previously delayed. These are not random changes, they reflect a shift. At the same time, it's important to be balanced. Not every dream is an attack, but when something happens repeatedly, it's worth paying attention. Patterns usually have meaning. I still think about the people I affected. Some of them never understood what happened to them. That remains difficult for me. And that is one reason I'm speaking now. Not to create fear, but to provide understanding so that someone else can recognize what is happening and respond differently. If you've been seeing snakes in your dreams, don't panic, but don't ignore it either. Take it seriously. Be steady. Because what held me for years did not hold forever and won't show. I'm I experienced shows that change is possible. And I want to speak to you plainly, the way I now understand things after everything I went through. If you have followed my story this far, then you already see something many people miss. These things are real in the lives of those experiencing them. But this last part is not about fear, it's about freedom. Because what held me for years is what I eventually came out of. After that moment, when I called the name of Jesus, things began to shift, but it didn't all end at once. I still had dreams. I still felt pressure at times. But there was light now, and that made a difference. I was no longer in the same position I had been before. The pastor in Enogo explained something to me that helped me understand my situation better. He said, Jama, what you were part of was not just something you did, it was a covenant. And the covenant doesn't just fade, it has to be broken deliberately. That stayed with me because it explained why things didn't just disappear overnight. So I continued with what I had started. I spoke clearly, not just once, but consistently. I made a decision about what I would accept and what I would no longer accept. That mattered more than I expected. Over time, the dreams reduced. The pressure eased. I began to notice changes in small ways at first. My rest improved. My thoughts became clearer. Things that once felt heavy started to lift gradually. There were still moments where I had to stand firm, moments where I had to repeat what I had already said, because some things try to return if you are not steady. But it was different now. I was no longer responding from fear, but from understanding. Let me tell you something I learned through all of this. Freedom is not always a single moment. Sometimes it's a process that begins with a decision and becomes stronger with consistency. There were signs, along the way that showed me I was no longer where I used to be. The constant snake dreams stopped. When I did dream, it was different. I wasn't being chased the same way. I felt lighter, both mentally and spiritually. It became easier to pray, easier to focus, easier to move forward. And when things in life that had been delayed started moving again, I understood that something had truly changed. I also came to see something clearly. Not every dream carries meaning, but repeated patterns should not be ignored. When something happens again and again, it deserves attention. That's a principle that applies in many areas of life, not just this one. I still think about the people I was assigned to in the past. Some of them never knew what was happening behind the scenes. That is something I can't change now, but it is one reason I'm speaking openly, not for attention and not to create fear, but so that someone listening can recognize what is happening and take it seriously. If you have been seeing snakes in your dreams, don't panic. Stay calm, but be deliberate. Pay attention. Take steps that bring clarity and strength. because ignoring something doesn't make it disappear. I've learned that what once feels overwhelming can be confronted and changed. It may not happen instantly, but it can happen. What held me for years was broken in a moment where I understood what I needed to do and acted on it. And if I could come out of it, then it means it's possible. If this has helped you see things more clearly, then share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to hear more accounts like this, you can follow Exoccult Confessions because there are still many things that people don't talk about openly. And sometimes understanding is the first step towards change. In the end, I've shared all of this with you not to frighten you, but to help you see clear. I've lived on the other side of these experiences, and I have seen how easily things can be ignored when they shouldn't be. What matters is awareness, consistency, and taking the right steps when something doesn't feel right. What once held me for years didn't last forever, and that's something worth remembering. Change is possible, but it starts with paying attention and making a firm decision. If this has helped you in any way, then I'd encourage you to subscribe so you don't miss more real stories like this. And if you think someone else needs to hear this, share it with them. Thank you for watching this video.